We're all in this together. 4 C's for supporting all learners in the COVID-19 crisis. Janet? So about, whoops. One of the things that probably all of you that are on know is that you can't have a lot of people clicking the slides at the same time. So the session, could you go back to us? Or this is first. The session agenda is the introductions, and then an introduction to CITES, which is the Center on Inclusive Technology and Education Systems, the 4 C's and why they are especially important now, supporting students with disabilities and resources, and a Q&A time. We will let you know though right now, a couple of things. One is that all children, all pets, all spouses, all of you together are welcome in this webinar. If you have a dog that comes in, that's fine. If you have a child that comes in, that's fine too. So whatever, just be relaxed and comfortable for this hour. So let's look at the next one. So about us, I'm Joy Zabala. I am the principal investigator for CITES. Janet, would you like to say who you are? And you're muted.
Hi, I'm Janet Peters. I'm a technical assistance specialist on CITES and with the National AIM Center. And I'm fairly new to CAST. I've been almost a year with the project.
Wonderful. So we also have with us today Leslie, who is going to be making sure everything works like it's supposed to and putting links in the chat. And we have Louise Paris, who is also a technical assistance specialist with the AIM Center and CITES. And we also have Casey, who's providing us with closed captions for the webinar. So the thing to know about CAST, if those of you who are new to CAST, is that the mission of CAST is actually to transform education design and practice until learning has no limits. And of course, what we're all experiencing right now is just an amazing exponential expansion of whatever the limits are. We like to say there are none, but they're different ones than we sometimes have. And CAST is the creator of Universal Design for Learning, which is a research-based set of principles that guide the design of learning environments that are accessible and effective for everyone. So one of the things that as we were planning this, that we came across this quote, and it seems so perfect for today: crisis forces commonality of purpose on one another. And as we all work together to make sure that all students, to the greatest extent possible, have the opportunity to participate and achieve during this crisis, then that's our common purpose. So the goal of our session is to offer a systems approach for thinking and operating during a crisis, rather than each person doing their own thing. What can the system do that makes a difference for all learners? To focus on technology-supported distance learning as a major component of a system of supports. As I say that, I'm sure many of you have already been in the situation where, oh, what about when technology support doesn't work, and thinking about that kind of thing too. So technology, though, is a huge part of that system of supports. We'll highlight 4 areas that support systems thinking and gather areas of interest or concern for participants. And that last one of the things that's really important to us is to know the kinds of things you need and want to hear about. So don't hesitate to write in the chat, I want to know more about this, or could you talk about that? Maybe not in this webinar, but in future webinars to come, since it looks like we're going to be in this mode for a while. So we have a poll. And what we're going to ask you with this poll is to share your area of focus. And many of you, when you see the poll, will say, oh, well, more than one of those is my area of focus. But put the one that's the most compelling for you right now. So Leslie, if you would open the poll. Just a few more seconds to go. So if you haven't entered yours, do it quickly, please. So Leslie, if you close the poll in about 15 seconds. Actually, that's fine. And share the results. It's perfectly okay. You can close it now. And what we see is that it's really nicely balanced, really, in except for information technology, which we are going to talk about a lot. So, but it's wonderful to know that there are ed tech people who are here, assistive technology people, special education, some general education teachers. Thank you. I was one of those for quite a long time. Families and caregivers, always glad to see you. And then federal or state programs as well. So, and then there are some others. So if you are one of the others, if you'd like to, you can put in the chat who you are, because we're always interested in who doesn't see themselves in one of the categories. One of the reasons state and federal program is there because I often don't see myself in these kinds of polls. And so definitely if you'd like to, okay, physical therapists, all the therapy people, we should definitely have added that to our group. So it's lovely, lovely to have everyone here. So Leslie, I think we're ready to go ahead. And our second poll is, where are you joining us from? And we've just made it regional: Northeast, North Central, Northwest, Southeast, South Central, Southwest. And then there's another in case you're not in any of those places. And I think Janet and I would, when we were putting this together, North Central is sort of that that Minnesota area that she's from, and Louise and is in Florida, so that's the Southeast. And then I spent a great deal of time in Texas, which I would consider the South Central. And again, we'll ask you if you are an other. Well, it would be lovely to know where you're from. Oh, some of you all are, you don't like those big old things that we gave you that opportunity for. Since I see a Rocky Mountain, few other places that we probably would put in a bigger picture, but that's wonderful. So let's end the poll and see where people are from. More Northeast, but a lot of Northeast, Southeast. It's really quite nice that there are significant numbers from everywhere, and that's great. So it's good to know these things. These help us a lot. So Janet, if you'll tell us a little bit about sites.
Sure. Thank you, Joy, and thanks everyone for letting us know. It's nice to see we have such a wide range of people geographically and a good disbursement of people. Sorry, therapists, that we forgot your category, but it's nice that you were here, and this will help us because, as the title says, we're all in this together, and I think having everyone's perspective is really important. So I just want to take a couple minutes to talk about CITES if you're not familiar with our project. CITES stands for the Center on Inclusive Technology and Education Systems. The project is funded by the Office of the U.S. Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs, and it's a joint project with CAST and the American Institutes of Research. So we both work on that together. The overarching goal of CITES is to increase the effective use of assistive technology and education technology by students with disabilities and their families. We really are looking at building capacity in school districts and looking at how those systems, the assistive technology and educational technology systems, can work together and synergize and collaborate. And we believe by that happening in a way that is, effective and useful, that really in the end will increase the use of technology and the effectiveness of technology for all students. So those are some of the big goals of the SITES project. We are doing this work in collaboration and partnership with districts all over the country. So we have a couple of different ways that we're doing that. We've worked with what we call our knowledge development districts. We have 11 of those districts. In the graph, they are yellow, and California also has some of our knowledge development districts. These districts helped us as an exemplar. They've done some aspect of the overarching goals of SITES really well, and we're using them as exemplars and models. We've interviewed and talked with these districts, and really they're helping us sort of build our knowledge base on what works when you have these inclusive technology ecosystems together. So that work is ongoing, and those knowledge development districts are part of our knowledge development. We also are working with framework development districts. These are districts that have a longer term, a more intense, longer term relationship with SITES. And these districts, we have 8 of those districts nationally, will be working with SITES over the next several years to create a framework of how technology systems work together: assistive technology, education technology, and information technology. Just a shout out to anyone in the audience, if we do have any of our SITES districts present, saying hi. We're glad for all the work that you're doing. As you can imagine, the project has taken a large pivot with the coronavirus epidemic, but we're just really grateful that we have such great districts to work with. During this pandemic, one of the things, because we are working with districts nationwide, we hope to scale up our work into what we call at OSEP the Universal Technical Assistance, which really just means we are developing products for everyone out there as quickly as we can to share with the wider community. So while some of our focus is specifically with our framework districts, that we are really trying to heed the call right now in this crisis and do what we can to share that information we have with districts across the nation.
Janet, could I say something before you go on?
Okay.
One thing that is important to know is that the the whole SITES group is funded by the U.S. Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs. For those of you who are outside of the country, that's what we shorten that to OSEP, so you might hear that word more than once in this. And we also do this with several partners. The biggest partner is a group with AIR, which is the American Institutes of Research. We also have a partnership with State Education Technology Directors Association, CETA, with the parent centers nationwide, and also with the ATIA, Assistive Technology Industry Association. So just a shout out to all of those people as we go forward.
Thanks, Joy. And if you go to the SITES website at sites.cas.org, our partners are listed on that, and you can also see a list of the districts that we are partnering with through the SITES program. In the About Us, we'll have the details of our partners, as I mentioned, the funding partner, as well as AIR, the American Institutes of Research, and our other partners. So those will be listed there. I mentioned the SITES framework that we are working on, and the SITES framework will be our way to offer to the districts nationally of what we really think works with including educational technology and assistive technology together. We are basing that, that framework on as a foundation, we're using the National Education Technology Plan. The National Education Technology Plan is a guiding policy document that has been around for a long time, from the United States Office of Education Technology. And this policy document has some really good information. So I would, in the handouts, there's a link to the National Education Technology Plan, and I would recommend going to look at that. We're using that as a foundation for the site's work and really looking at some of how they have articulated a vision and put in some really good information. We're taking that and looking at getting down to the how-tos. How do you take that information and really make it work with assistive technology and educational technology together? The National Education Technology Plan is currently being updated, so you can make public comments on that right now, and that's available. They have a survey on their website for that, and I believe Leslie has put the link in the chat for that, for the National Ed Tech Plan. In the site-specific work, we also have a survey on our website that looks at our particular goals of sites in relation to the Ed Tech Plan. So if you have opinions or comments or ideas on that, we'd love to hear from you through our survey as well. So before the pandemic crisis, sites was working on this, and we believed that the time was really critical for the work and the goals of sites. I mean, some of the things that have happened in the industry of more accessibility features and more access to technology in schools really seemed like the time was now to have assistive technology and educational technology work more seamlessly together for better outcomes for students. And so the momentum was with us before the crisis. We really felt like this was the time to sort of tackle some of these systems issues. But now, as we're all facing this abrupt shift to distance education and remote learning in a very rapid fashion, we can see that there is a really big urgency for the work that sites does, for assistive technology and education technology to work together and to synergize, because we're seeing the gaps in the system when those technology systems don't work together. Students will have a really difficult time in this new push to distance learning. So we think that even though some of our stuff is getting a little bit rushed, we do think that sites was on track with providing a foundation for this information. And with that, I will turn it over to Joy to talk about how we think the systems work can get done in our, we call it the 4 C's. And so Joy can go into that.
So the 4 C's that we'll be focusing on are these. Janet? Coordination, collaboration, communication, and continuity. And the notion that in this environment that we're in now, that technology is one of the major ways that we can make those things happen, certainly in terms of communication and continuity, but they happen most effectively and efficiently if we are working toward them in a coordinated fashion in which everyone has the opportunity to collaborate. Because we have such different environments than we had just a few short weeks ago, then all of this becomes even more important. And as Janet said, the whole notion of sites is that these kinds of things should be happening. But to really suddenly be thrust into them, people who really were not exactly ready, how can we be as ready as we can be going forward? So when we look at things as a system, rather than what Joy does, what Janet does, what Louise does, what every one of you do, it gives us a chance, we hope, to serve students more effectively and efficiently And we know also that if we're not supporting staff and families, that we can't help them support students. So continue on, Janet. So we talked about the who, the what, and the how. So I'm going to look at each of the 4 C's along with sort of through that lens of the who, the what, and the how. And what we found as we were putting this together is really that the who is consistent across all 4 of the C's. They are the educational administrators, general education teachers, special education teachers, families, parents and guardians, and the students themselves, all of whom have and need in this situation the support of leaders in infotech, which is the big system piece, I call it, the people who wear the suits, and the ed tech people and the assistive technology people. And so as we all work together with our different approaches to technology, we are better able to support all of the other people. And everybody plays a role in all of this. So if you go to the next one, let's look at the what and the how. So I'm going to look at continuity in 2 ways. One is continuity getting from where we were to where we are. And that would be moving from that face-to-face to online teaching and learning. And many of us had not really thought we were going to be doing that. We who are here, Janet, Louise, me, we work on Zoom like every single day, but that's not usual for most of you out there. Some of you, sure, but most of you not. So as we think about continuity here, then whenever possible, try to continue with what was working with you, with your class, with your group that you support. And to be familiar, if you were familiar with something in the classroom setting and you knew that it was working, stay with those familiar things, because that's not only helpful to you, it's helpful to everyone else who's involved. And then we also want to think about minimizing the introduction of new digital materials and technologies. And for many people, this is really hard, because what's happening right now is everything seems to be available all of a sudden, and hundreds of different apps and many programs that were not as quite available as they are now are suddenly here. But rather than introducing lots of new things, be sure that you're going back to your district and state leaders and finding out what's actually in place now that we can build upon, rather than let's introduce these new things for everybody. And that doesn't mean you don't ever introduce new things, but just as you're getting started, take it slow and build on success once people are beginning to feel some level of success with what you're doing in these new environments. And then there's communication. And the what of communication is building that communication system that can be used to build trust, to maintain connections, and to support the work. Determine what kinds of communication tools and strategies are going to be used, and under what conditions will they be used. You may or may not use the same tool to communicate internally as you might be to communicate with students and parents. And then there are tools that you might use under certain circumstances. So of course, what we know, the graphic on the right, it shows you mail, connectivity, telephone, handhelds, newspapers, lots of different ways that we communicate. But it isn't always every single communication that takes one of those particular ways of doing it. So you want to be clear on who to contact and under what circumstances and by what means contact should be taking place, depending on what you're doing and what it's about. And then to set schedules for communication, particularly across students and educators, students, and educators' families on mutually agreeable times. Because as we know, not only are we, all of us on this call, working from home, but so are other people in our homes working from home. And as I said at the beginning, remember that parents and children and pets and everybody is welcome here, but that may not always be easy to manage on how we communicate about some of the issues we need to communicate about. So next one. And then coordination. to really think about coordinating services so that all students and families have what they need to participate and achieve while learning at a distance. And this is something we're all grappling with, I think, at this point. But when we think about the how, again, the systemic approach, not everybody doing their own thing, but thinking about how do we work together in a coordinated fashion. So to determine what technology, what strategies are being used already, and how to build upon those and grow as needed, rather than just suddenly jumping into a whole bunch of new things. So making sure that, again, you're talking with the technology people in your district. You even go maybe to the state level. One of our partners, CETA, the State Education Technology Directors Association, has a list on their website of all the tech leaders in each state. So if you don't know who that is, you can look them up. But certainly within your own environment, make sure that you are coordinated with others. We want to make sure too that when we coordinate, it's not just the technology itself, but how are we going to provide initial and ongoing support so that people can learn to use technology tools well, and to develop strategies for students who do not have or cannot benefit from online work. That's a group that's very at risk in this particular environment. And some of the things that come up when we listen to families, at which we do all the time, and appreciate so much that there are some family members on this, and also some of you may be in dual roles as an educator and a family member. Thinking about that group that is really, really vulnerable, which was why we said at the beginning, technology and other supports, because we know that there are other parts of that coordinated system. Janet? And then collaboration, which means, okay, how do we do this? If infotech, the infrastructural technology people, the people who are involved in educational technology, and the people in assistive technology, if they work together, they can ensure that technology systems are understood and can be used by all. So again, the notion of providing initial and ongoing support that increase the ability both of school personnel, but also students and families, to use the technology that we're using for teaching and learning and communicating and all of those kinds of things. Really keeping, while we are at a physical distance, keeping our social distance connected. So remember that I think probably we're using the wrong term when we talk about social distancing. We're really talking about physical distancing and how important it is for us to maintain the contact and the trust among all of us that this is something we're going through and we will get through. And then to make sure that we strive for interoperability with assistive technology in the general education technologies that we're using. So that means that if someone is using an assistive technology device and is also using or should be using general education technologies, that they're able to use their device in whatever way they use it in order to be a part of what's happening in that general education technology. That's sort of a kludgy explanation of what interoperability means, but it basically means that things can fit together and work together. And then we have another kind of continuity. We have the in the future continuity. And the what is consider the lessons learned and review the data that's happening from this time to determine what did we do and what worked, which tools and strategies will be kept as we go forward, and which tools and strategies will be discontinued because they did not yield the information, pardon me, they did not yield how to go forward together. So the hows there is to determine what does effectiveness look like. And you want to do that now so that you can begin to keep data on which tools and strategies worked during this crisis. And then when the crisis is over and some of the things that are now free are available at cost, which ones of those things do we want to continue to use? And which ones do we not because they were less effective than we expected? And analyze our data to make informed decisions about that. So with that, I'm going to go back to Janet with special considerations for students with IEPs.
Thanks, Joy. And I think that we want you all to know that the presentation, and we're really talking about all students, but that there are special considerations for students with disabilities and IEPs or 504 plans. And they are vulnerable right now because we have to be sure that that population is not forgotten when we make this shift to digital learning that we're all making right now. So the Department of Education has provided guidance on students with disabilities and services that they should receive during the crisis. And the information has been clear that if the district continues to provide education to the general population, that the school must ensure that students with disabilities also have equal access to that same opportunity, which in disability speak, we call the free and appropriate public education. In the link that Leslie put in the chat has all of the links from this presentation, and there is particular guidance from the Department of Education and the Office of Civil Rights, and all of that information is on our AIM site, and the National Accessible Educational Materials Center, and has an ongoing COVID response list. And so when we learn about information that is officially coming from the U.S. Department of Education, we are posting it here, but we're emphasizing that students with disabilities are to be educated during this crisis, and it's really important that we have that information available to families, to our district leaders, to the general public, that special education services do continue. CAST recently, there has been a lot of national discussion about this, of waivers and special education services, and CAST did recently respond to the waiver question. And this is important because it's the CAST stance, and that we wanted to have the public know that CAST is taking a position on that no additional waivers are necessary for students with IEPs or under Section 504 plans. That information is available on the cast.org site, so you can see our letter. But I think the bottom line of that is that we just really philosophically believe that the support for students with disabilities is needed right now. We know how to do this. We've been talking about this at sites for the last year, and CAST has been talking about this through Universal Design for Learning, as well as from an accessible educational materials perspective for a really long time. So I think that the message we want to get across is that we know how to do it, and CAST is here to support that endeavor. And so we don't think that more exceptions or waivers are necessary. And I think we just really want to emphasize that as a position. There are links on the slides as well as in the handout for other disability organizations and their response to the waiver question and to students with disabilities during this time. That said, if we go with the underlying assumption that students with disabilities, well, first of all, they're just part of our student population, and we can find a way to work with them. Everyone has a role to play in this. And this, at sites, we believe technology plays a large role, but it's a really systemic, it's a systemic issue, and it does take everyone working together. Administrators in a school district certainly set the tone and the expectations, the guidelines, as well as the opportunities for general education, special education, families, assistive technology, education technology, to all be working together. And so educator, from an administrator role, this takes the leadership piece, and to say this is the expectation that all of the school staff connect with families, and support students with disabilities. Special education teachers have a vital role in this crisis as well, in communication with the general education teachers and understanding and assistance in what accommodations, what modifications, what was in the IEP get carried into the virtual world in a way that's effective for students and that supports those general education teachers. And general education teachers, well, always should know what the IEP requirements are for students, really have to make a special effort that those accommodations and special modifications that are listed in the IEP or the Section 504 plan are addressed when lessons are pushed out, when technologies are pushed out to families to be doing at home. And that's going to take a lot more coordination than possibly has happened in the past from general ed and special ed teachers, as well as assistive technology and education technology staff working together. Joy mentioned interoperability, and this is where education technology staff, both assistive technology as well as information technology and education technology, as technologies are deployed for families in their homes, for the curriculum, for the learning, that distance education becomes how we are educating students during the crisis. What that technology is, the accessibility of that technology, the interoperability with assistive technology devices takes utmost communication and a priority from all of the technology staff working together, as well as probably training and support to special ed and general ed teachers as they are deploying those technologies for families. So the moral of the story, everyone is in this together and everyone has a role to support all students, and students with disabilities are part of that. We have been working with CETA, and Joy mentioned that's the State Education Technology Directors Association. And that group has created a tip for communicating with parents. The link for that is on the screen, and it's bit.ly/parent tips-COVID, and it's in the chat window. Thank you, Leslie. The important thing when you're communicating with parents during this crisis is to remember to establish the relationship first and make sure that that people feel solid. This is a very stressful time for everyone, and I think that the families that Joy and I have been talking to, and when we talk about this, many families are feeling a lot of stress in this situation, as we all are. And so being sure that that we emphasize the relationship piece of that. The tips also, try to remember that not all parents are comfortable with technology or have different technology skills with that. So clearly communicating and having support for them, and providing, that little graphic Joy had, the two-way communication, so parents have an opportunity to ask specific people about if they are having problems or just questions about the district technology in general. So more of those tips and perspectives of communicating with families are on that link. And before I turn it back over to Joy to open it up for question and answer, and we'll have a lot of time for that, to just acknowledge that there are some challenges. This crisis has pushed us into remote learning and distance education in a way faster that people would have loved to, of course, been more prepared for this, but that's not the nature of a crisis, right? And so some of the challenges we're hearing are probably similar to what you're hearing, of assistive technology being forgotten as things are being pushed out from a district technology perspective, if that technology works or is incompatible, or the technology being pushed is inaccessible. General technology access. Do families have access to the tablets and the computers that they need in the home? Many families might have one computer, but if 4 family members are now home vying for attention on that computer, technology access could be an issue. As I mentioned, parent technology ability and general inequity issues with financial or other stressors at home. So I think we know that there are challenges, and to be gentle with families, gentle with each other, and know that this is a really difficult time for people. But that said, I think that there are opportunities. This has pushed us into a direction that, as we've mentioned, SITES has been looking at a better systemic role for technology in schools through our project. And we think this is an opportunity for better communication between families and districts and teachers. It also allows, or we see the importance, and will give us an opportunity for assistive technology and educational technology systems to, synchronize and to communicate better, and know the importance of that it is really critical that students who use assistive technology are thought about as educational technology is developed. And in the spirit of UDL, I've heard from a couple of teachers who are a little hopeful that students that don't talk in class or don't show their knowledge in traditional ways in this flexible environment may shine and may be able to show teachers and their families that what they do know with a little bit of flexibility. So keeping the universal design for learning flexibility in mind with how we assess and evaluate how students are doing. So with that, I will turn it over to Joy to take us on the home stretch and open it up for questions and discussion.
Great, thank you, Janet, for that information. And there was a person who had a hand raised, and I think, Louise, there was also another question that maybe you could ask. And also, people, please go ahead and write your questions or your comments in the chat, and we will do our best to address them, or enable you all to address them yourselves in the chat as we go along. So Louise, did you have one that we could start with?
Yes, I do have a question here. This is Louise. It's how are OCR students affected by the closings who have to do community service to get their diplomas? And so whoever posed the question, maybe you can explain what you mean by OCR. We just want to make sure that we understand the, the population or the students that you're referring to.
Yeah, that would be great. And if you raise your hand, I think we can unmute you, and you can even just say it. Maybe now someone's looking, how do I raise my hand?
There's the answer in the chat.
Occupational studies. All right. Marguerite, could you say a little bit more about OCS? Good. All right. A little about occupational studies would be like, and it could be totally wrong. Okay, here we go. But is that where someone has a job that is part of their schooling for which they will get credit or perhaps not? Yeah, okay. And I'm wondering if that, and Louise and Janet or anybody else, please chime right in, because I'm wondering if that may be the same as everything else. I don't know if you all saw it. This April Fool's Day was there was not a great deal of humor around this April Fool's Day. I think people really thought that people could not deal with much more. But the one April Fool's joke that I heard was that the way we were going to deal with this crisis and people being out of school is they would just repeat whatever the current grade they were in. And of course, that's not what's going to happen. And some of the things that have been done are, removing the statewide testing or that's reported so that there's not the trauma related to this happening at the same time everybody was gearing up for testing. And I would think with occupational studies, it may be very much the same because people can't go to work, just like they can't go to school. So I would think that would be something you definitely would want to ask the people that you work with. How are they planning to handle that particular issue? Because it may have been one that not very many people beyond you, Marguerite, have actually thought about. So in your area. But that's probably something that many people face about what do we do now in this situation. So I'm sorry I don't have a really an answer other than talk to the people that are closer to you. Okay, so now a little bit more. Marguerite says, I actually work with adults who were unable to get their work part done and therefore could not graduate. Okay, so these students will then try to go and get a GED. I was wondering how that would impact them. And again, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Janet, and I see Joe's response. In my state, there are guidelines and has a governmental act, and that's what I was going to recommend. Is that I'm not sure what state you're from, but the State Department of Education should have a guidance and contact on that, because I know that that is one thing we in Minnesota that was brought up from our Department of Education for them to make a statement and address it as a statewide issue. So that would be my first response, is to try to locate who in the Department of Ed could answer that question.
Great. And Kevin, thank you, Kevin, for being here. Kevin from the Office of Education Technology, someone that we work with, has said that he's been working on that, and there really is looking into that, and it is a state-by-state issue. So I think all state departments of education right now, which is one of the reasons why we collaborate and coordinate, are really looking at, okay, what do all of these things mean in this current environment, in this, what for some people is lost learning time. I mean, that can't be replicated because they must go to a particular place to do whatever it is they're expected to do. So that will be something that state departments are wrestling with and trying to come up with an answer that's helpful. So definitely go to your State Department of Education, find out who your occupational studies contact is, and coordinate with whatever they're talking about at that particular time.
There is another question here, Joy and Janet, and it is the following. If paid AT is unavailable to purchase at this time, do you recommend free equivalents?
Go ahead, take it away.
I can jump in that. That's Trevor. So, and we'll try to keep them short so we can get to all the answers, but know that you will have our contact information, and we are available to follow up in more in-depth. So when I give my not in-depth answer. So my first question would be, why is it unavailable to purchase? And if it was assistive technology that was used prior to the crisis, or if it's something to support online remote learning. I do not think, I think that a free equivalent is fine if it truly is an equivalent that provides access. As assistive technology, you're trying to solve the problem at hand. And so I don't see a problem with a free equivalent, but there's some background questions of what they were using before, and does that, what assistive, now would be a really difficult time to introduce new assistive technology. So that continuity piece Joy talked about, I think would be really critical on what assistive technology is being introduced at this point. And Joy, maybe you have more to say on that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say a little more, and Louise might even want to add something in here, because one of the things you have to also be very careful about is that something for free, is it maintaining student privacy? Is it accessible actually to the student? As Janet said, you want to make sure that you have, as much as possible, an equally effective means that you're putting in place. So I think the privacy is one of the big ones. I have to say, as a person who spent a lot of time in assistive technology, that we in assistive technology, and I think in this particular environment, everybody's sort of like, what tool, what's free, what can I do? And you see lists and lists and lists of tools, which are introducing new things and also not necessarily coordinated with what else is going on. So Louise, you want to say a word or two about that as well?
I would second what the two of you just said. It's really try to first look at those familiar tools that you've been using. Also, coordinate with your district, because they probably have a vetting process in place that looks at things like privacy, accessibility, and security. Let's not forget security.
Right, absolutely.
So those three things need to be considered, and it's something that usually at the district level, at the state level has been looked at. So definitely, you know, free is not always completely free. Like there is in some cases information that's collected, and that's how it can be free. So we need to be careful about that.
Good, thank you. And there's also another question, is there a good resource you could recommend for providing remote instruction or therapy to students with multiple or more severe disabilities that are not able to regularly access online learning? I've mainly been providing parents coaching and activities and resources for parents to do with their children, but it is such a huge ask for parents. Rachel, I could not agree with you more. That being said, no, I don't really have an answer for that. It's one of the, that is way back at the beginning, I said something about that really ultra at-risk student in this kind of situation, because you have parents, family members who are now spending 24/7 time with their children and are providing all kinds of other supports for their children. And now they are also the co-learner along with their child. And that's an ongoing challenge. I wish I could tell you there's a great resource for that, but I think the important thing is that we're really sensitive to that, and that there's a quote coming up in a minute that might be helpful for you as we close. You'll get to see that. I like it a lot, so I don't want to tell it now. But as far as a single resource, you're probably on the right track. It's not easy. Either for the teacher or the therapist or the parent or the student, but we really have to keep thinking about that group for whom distance education looks very different than it does for most of us. And it's the place where I think, Louise, when we were talking yesterday, you said, yeah, and there's I was talking to Chris Bouguet, and he says, yeah, and there's another C. And he said, it's creativity. And I really think that that's a key here, is how can we do something that we've never done before in a way that seems to help us all move forward together. So we probably have time for maybe one more question.
Here's a good one for both of you. Are optional learning packets or educational enrichment activities posted on a school website or distributed at meal pickups, which a lot of school districts are doing, considered an educational opportunity? And there's some text in the chat that goes along with that.
Well, you know, I have to say that in assistive technology, we say that there's a perfect answer, and the perfect answer is it depends. And I think that that really is important here, is that those packets may work beautifully for some people and yet not work beautifully for all. And that pretty much brings us back to universal design for learning. Are we providing multiple ways for students to reach the goals that they have? And certainly packets can be very helpful and very useful for some. Sometimes they can't. Sometimes there's connectivity issues and the packet might be helpful, but does the packet have the opportunity for the student to do something creative, or is it just a packet full of worksheets? And I think, you know, if it doesn't work very well at school, it probably is going to not work better just because they're doing it in their home environment. You know, interestingly, and Janet might want to say, oh, that's okay. Oh, she says it's time to go, I think.
No, that was an accident. Yeah, I was just going to jump in and say, and I think that, I think Joy's answer of it depends. It doesn't mean that you can't have work packets, because you may have connectivity issues. There may be, you know, you may want options, as in universal design for learning. So a student isn't on the computer 8 hours a day, but those accessibility pieces, if a student is using assistive technology and you just provide a paper worksheet, thinking about how does a person who uses electronic text to speech to read their book, how are they going to interact with that packet? So the same things that should be being thought about in classroom curriculum, but sometimes can get glossed over, are really, really critical on accessibility when it's at home. And I think that Joy's answer of multiple ways to access the material is the best practice in this case.
And I would just add very quickly that that packet probably started as a digital file on somebody's computer. So why not include a link somewhere to where that is hosted somewhere on a website or a district website, but somewhere where there's options so that now you can access it electronically if you do have that choice to do that.
Great, thank you, Louise. So I think at this point, I want to do a commercial, if you will, for this time next week. We have the second in the series of We're All in This Together. And this time next week, we're going to go right to people on the ground. And we have guests who are coming to talk about what they've done in their districts, what kinds of issues they've faced, what some of their solutions are. And we have Chris Bugay, who's from a very large district. We have Dr. Drew Hines, who's from a smaller district. And we also have a person who is a therapist on the ground in a district in Texas. And so we hope that some of you will find this valuable and come back next week. We are very much looking forward to the conversation with Chris and Drew and Jessica. And I think you would like that too. And again, you'll have your opportunities for questions. We'll also save the chat so that if you want to see some of the suggestions and things that have come up while the chat was going on, you can have it. So here's the quote that I love. And I think it goes along with another quote that is not written, but I'll tell you about. Arthur Ashe, is, for those of you who are not tennis fans, is a tennis person who died young in a similar crisis. He got AIDS from a blood transfusion before they knew that was possible. But I love what he says: start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. And the more we coordinate and collaborate, the better we're going to be able to do that, because the you there is much more than each individual person, but what's happening locally, what's happening nationally, that we can share what we have, both knowledge and skills, but also the things that we know about that may be useful to others. The second quote that is not there is the one that lots of you have heard and probably used. It's from Maya Angelou, who says, do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better. So that's the end of the hour with us. Janet, any last words?
Nope, just logistics. Thank you all for your great attention, and the resources are available in the slides and in a separate handout, and great questions, and we hope to see you next week. It was really enlightening. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to Louise, and thank you to Leslie, and thank you to Casey. So we appreciate all of you being a part of this, and we hope to see you again. And don't worry, if you have anything at all that you'd want to talk with us about, we are always here. And you can find us all at sites.cast.org and go from there.
And please fill out the evaluation.
Oh, yes, please. There is an evaluation form. Leslie, I think it's, I'm thinking, gee, it's not there. There are 39 messages down below where I can see. So we appreciate you being here, Leslie. Right now, right in the chat, you'll see the webinar survey. And if you would complete that, there's also a place where you can say more topics we'd like to hear about and have as part of a discussion. We would be most grateful if you would share those too. So thank you so much for being here with us, and we'll see you here soon.
And thank you so much to Casey from ACS Captions for providing the closed captions this afternoon. Have a great day, everybody.